Welcome to the CEO of Destiny podcast, where you will find the tools to fulfill the purpose of your generation and wildly succeed in the marketplace. And now your host, Andre J. Benjamin.
Greetings. Welcome to the CEO of Destiny podcast and show. I am your host, Andre J. Benjamin, and I am delighted and excited to have our special guest for the day. We call them alumni once they finish because they really make an impact, and it is an educational experience. So I'm delighted to have Simba with us today. I'm going to read a little bit about Simba's story and why he's here today, because I really believe he embodies the CEO of Destiny mindset, that he has a developer's mindset, a founder's mindset, a steward's mindset. He understands what it takes to go from point A to execution. And this is something that many people are missing, because a lot of people are theoretical, or they get caught up in a lot of things, but they don't actually produce. So I love him because he's a producer, and we'll get more of his story in a second, but I want to give a little bit of your background. So Simba was born in Zimbabwe and was privileged to come to the United States for college 22 years ago. He studied accounting, finance at Seattle University. He's married to the bride of his youth and they have 3 kids. 2 of them are in college, and the last born is 11 years old. He's worked in various finance roles for 18 years, and most recently was a CFO at an Insurtech company that was acquired by a large financial institution. So him and his family had this spiritual awakening that he's going to share about, because we want to hear that. And the great thing is that he has a heart to pour back into his home nation, of which you'll hear about. So I want to not waste any time, because I want to get into this conversation. Simba, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today, sir?
Feeling good, Andre. Welcome. Humble. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really, really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So take us a little bit. That was the little written stuff, but let's get your, I'm really into Marvel. I grew up, we had the battle of Marvel versus DC, but I'm really into Marvel because I love the fact that I feel like Stan Lee was really serious about story arc. Of course he had a team that worked with him, but I love the fact that he was the narrator, and he had these little isms that he would put in there that would pull you into whether this teenager that's in Brooklyn, or Queens, or, just different stuff that we find the story arc and the origin story of heroes. And I believe that people are modern day heroes. I'm not just talking about superheroes, but people that are just doing things that are meaningful with their lives. So tell us a little of your origin story.
Yeah. So as you were saying, my name is Simba. So my full name is actually Simbarashe. And and Simbarashe actually means God's power.
Wow.
So I was originally born in Zimbabwe, and the reason my parents gave me that name was, my mom was, she tried to have kids for 10 years. For 10 years, she couldn't have any kids.
So she's like a real life Hannah.
She's like a real life Hannah, for real. And but I don't think, I think my birth was about the fullness of time. I got that from you, Andre, because I love that term, the fullness of time, because I was actually then born. The year I was born was the year Zimbabwe became independent for the first, independent from school. So I was born in December 5th, 1980. And so I'm exactly the same age as Zimbabwe, so which is kind of crazy.
little fun factoid.
I know.
So that's not accidental then. And it's kind of cool because you also are dispelling the myth, because the inevitable question you're going to hear about your name that I introduced you is, were you named after what?
I was named before. I was, I was predestined before Lion King became.
Yes, he was predestined before the Lion King. All right, audience, get it out. I know some of you have a middle school mind, so you were like, he's named after my favorite character. That's my movie. No, he's predestined before it, so it's powerful. So it means God's power.
God's power.
God's power. That's powerful. So that even when people hear that, so people have heard that name globally, and it really is pointing to God's power. Maybe that's interesting why it resonates, why even in the film it resonates with so many people.
The full name Simbarashe. So Simba is like how people have done it, but the full name Simbarashe, literally means God's power. So like in the Shona culture where I'm from, that's like, it's like the fullness of who God is. it is in that name. So yeah, it's
perfect. So you were born in Zimbabwe, I'd assume.
Yeah, in Zimbabwe.
Right when it was independent. And tell us a little bit about your upbringing. What kind of things were you into, and how you ended up in the field that you're in? It's like what type of interest you had? Take us a little bit just give us a little bit of young Simba.
Yeah, for sure. My parents were like, they grew up really poor, but they somehow found their way into like university. They both were in school in England. So education was such a big deal. And this is like, my dad made it to England. He was in college in his 30s, right? Because it was tough to get there. He had to get scholarships, and it's a whole story. Because he was pretty much plucked out of this family where he was almost like the David, everyone's like, oh, this he was the fourth born, but he wasn't the chosen one, but he found his way in England. My mom also was there doing nursing, and that's where they met. And so education was always a big deal to them. And so growing up, like, being in school and actually even having extra lessons, having someone after school teaching you, like, we're going to drill down this math, we're going to drill down this English, was such a big deal in our family. And I think in a lot of like African cultures, you see like they see an avenue through education as like the way out. It's not about other skill sets or arts or basketball, sports. It's about school. So that was what I was really drilled into. And my dad was in business. He wasn't actually a politician, but he was a really good businessman. He actually owned like a couple businesses. And so I was always around.
What type of business?
He owned a newspaper,
nice.
which became a mouthpiece talking that really published. Was the first. He was the first. He ran the first Black-owned newspaper in Zimbabwe ever. Him and a couple of his buddies, and then it was a mouthpiece to talk the truth about what was happening in Zimbabwe. And in various times he got arrested, he was in trouble because the government didn't like what he was uncovering. So during the summers I actually started going to work with my dad, and we didn't really have summers. It was more like we had these breaks between school, like maybe 3 or 4 times a year. So during those breaks, as all my friends were hanging out. You guys would
go year round, but just shorter breaks.
Yeah. So during those breaks, my dad was like coming to work with me. So I remember just going to work and then somehow I was always in the accounting department, in finance, and then I always see like their books, which were these. It wasn't a computer; it was a big ledger. It was this big book of the numbers, and just understanding of how financial statements work. So I started really being into looking at numbers and into like investing. And so, he had a financial newspaper, which is called the Financial Gazette. And at the back of the financial newspaper, there were always like a stock index of the different companies and the prices of their stocks and why they went up and went down. And I was always fascinated about what drives that. Why is it valuable? Why is it more valuable now? Why is it less valuable today? It was so, I don't know, it was so interesting to me. So
you were just drawn to the numbers.
Drawn to numbers. Yeah, I was just drawn to numbers. And I wasn't even that good at it. I wasn't like the top math guy.
Yes.
But I just was something inside me just leaped whenever I was kind of those around numbers.
So especially when it seems like, especially from what I'm hearing you're saying, is that it's especially around finance then. Financial numbers were really more, because when you were asking about value and how is value determined and why does the value keep shifting and what are the metrics that this is measured by, when you said you were looking at the prices of stocks and valuations, that was you were curious about that.
Yeah, I was really curious about that, and really curious about like wanting to understand that more. So I started taking, in Zimbabwe, you can actually, the way the education system works is that like after you're 16, you take your O levels, and they have a thing called A levels, which is actually supposed to be almost like the subjects you really want to take when you go to college. So you actually I took accounting, I took math, and I think I took economics. So I took like things that I felt like, oh, this is really what I want to do. So they kind of really get you like focused. Yeah.
Wow, that's actually seems, well, it's interesting because I had when I was in college many moons ago, I had one of my classmates was from Morocco, and she was telling me the same thing of how like her younger brother, they had put him on more of an athletic track like she was like, we have to decide our things early on. Like there is no, they were like, you guys waste a lot of time. They said we have to,
yeah, it's true.
we have to pick something early on. So even if we don't want to so-called do it the rest of our life, it's expected that we would pick something.
Yeah.
And start working on. That's kind of interesting. So what did you find that your peers were into some of the same things? Were you gravitating towards people into the same thing, or was what age were you when you really started to see this affinity towards numbers?
Yeah, I think when I started taking my first accounting classes, I think that was probably when I was like 14, 15. I was like, wow, I really kind of like how you solve things, accounting things balance. There's like everything. There's some like satisfaction to see things being equal. So it's kind of very black and white, and I felt like that. I really like that. And accounting is the basis of how you understand companies. I mean, if you've heard like Warren Buffett, like his whole thing is like, look at the financial statements, look at the balance sheets.
He reads them from the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, and that's really the basis of how you buy things. And even when you look at the best way to value stocks, right? You're looking at price to earnings. Earnings is like what you make versus the price, right? So like that's like the basis of what you buy is based on what they actually make, right? So it's very grounding to me because it's like you can't lie. In stock markets, lie, right? There's all kinds of stuff happening, and you can get caught up. But like with accounting is like, this is the truth. At the end of the day, here's like what happened, and so I've always liked that grounding of truth of what happened. And I think from there on, I really became more interested in like, but then what causes those things to happen, which then becomes business, operations, execution, right? What's your product, right? It lends it, you start like, that's the baseline, but then you start thinking about what's the causes of that. And as I've kind of grew in my career, I had to start off with knowing what it is. But I think at the height of my career, being a CFO, now I have to be a person who can see the trends and actually be instrumental in driving favorable results of business, because now I know how things work from the ground up. So that's kind of been like, that was the basis to where
so you saw it as a way to see the honesty of the matter. So it's when you looked at a business, you said you like you said, stocks can lie. Like you said, something can be hyperinflated in value. People, there's a trend. Some of our previous alumni guests on the show have talked about how they didn't like the trend of companies being paraded around in the media based upon how much money they raised versus how much they had actually earned. He said, okay, these ones have actually earned that. They've proved their value. And this one is just kind of still on a, whimsical, look at how much money they've raised. And they were walking around. He was like, he didn't believe in the idea of a profession of just being he's like, you have the profession of entrepreneur, but you haven't actually produced anything like a lot of value.
Exactly.
So, the numbers. So then take us a little bit more on your journey. How did you end up becoming to where you're currently at now?
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do us a favor. If this was useful in any way for you, please go to iTunes and leave us a review. Reviews will allow others to easily discover the podcast. If you'd like more information and to receive a free download, rediscover your destiny, go to ceofdestiny.com. Thanks again, and tune in next time.